The day my 81-year-old landlady placed a small brass key in my hand, I thought she was asking me to lock her room after she was gone. I had no idea that one tiny key would change my entire life. If someone had told me a month earlier that an old woman I paid rent to would one day call me her daughter and leave me a fortune worth $55 million, I would have laughed, because people like me don't end up in stories like that. My name is Emily Carter. 3 years ago, I moved to Boston with nothing but 2 suitcases, a nursing assistant certificate, and a dream that seemed farther away every day. I worked long shifts at a small hospital. The pay covered rent. Barely. Some months, after paying my bills, I had less than $20 left for food. Every dollar mattered. Every extra shift mattered. I rented a small room in a quiet old house owned by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. She was already in her 80s. She lived alone, no husband, no children, no parents, no close family that I ever saw. The first time I met her, she looked serious. "I don't like loud music," she said. "I don't throw parties," I answered. She looked at me for a second, then smiled. "Good. Then we'll get along." That was the beginning. At first, we were simply landlady and tenant. I paid my rent on time. She minded her own business, I minded mine. But little things slowly changed everything. Whenever I came home from work, I noticed she was sitting alone on the front porch. Sometimes she would stare at the sunset for nearly an hour, not speaking, just watching. One evening I asked gently, "Would you like some tea?" She looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," I smiled. "I want to." That evening lasted almost 3 hours. She told me stories about growing up, about dancing with her husband when they were young, about dreams that never came true. She never complained, she simply talked, as if she had been waiting years for someone to listen. After that, sharing tea became our routine. Every evening, no matter how tired I was. Sometimes I cooked extra soup for both of us. Sometimes she baked apple pie. She always insisted I take the larger slice. "You work harder than I do," she'd laugh. Slowly, the house didn't feel like a rental anymore. It felt like home. I never called her grandma. She never called me daughter. But somehow, we both knew something beautiful had quietly begun. I just didn't realize how deeply she had already opened her heart to me. And I certainly didn't know. She had already made a decision that would leave everyone else speechless. The seasons changed, but our evenings never did. No matter how exhausting my shift had been, I always found a few minutes to sit with Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore before going to my room. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we simply enjoyed the silence. She would smile and say, "You know, Emily, silence doesn't feel lonely when the right person is sitting beside you." I never forgot those words. As months passed, I noticed little things changing. She walked a little slower. Her hands shook when she poured tea. She often forgot where she had left her glasses. One rainy afternoon, I found her struggling to carry a bag of groceries up the front steps. I rushed over. "Mrs. Whitmore, why didn't you call me?" She smiled softly. "Because you've already done enough." I carried the bags inside anyway. That evening, I quietly started helping her with more than groceries. I picked up her medicine after work. I fixed the loose cabinet door in the kitchen. I drove her to doctor's appointments whenever I had a day off. Not because she asked, because it felt right. She thanked me every single time. One evening, she looked at me with watery eyes. "Emily, why are you so kind to an old woman who isn't even family?" I laughed gently. My mother always told me that kindness doesn't need a family name. She didn't answer. She simply reached across the table and held my hand for a moment. From that day on, something changed in her eyes. She no longer looked at me like a tenant. She looked at me with a warmth I couldn't explain. A few weeks later, I came home after a difficult shift. I was exhausted. One of my patients had passed away that morning, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Mrs. Whitmore noticed immediately. Without saying a word, she placed a warm bowl of homemade chicken soup in front of me. "You spend your days taking care of everyone else," she whispered. "Tonight, let someone take care of you." I couldn't hold back my tears. No one had said something like that to me in years. She reached into a drawer and handed me an old photograph. In it, she was standing beside a little girl with bright eyes and a wide smile. "My niece," she said quietly. "She passed away when she was only 9. She looked down at the picture. "After that, I never had another child in my life." Then she looked back at me. "But when you walked through that front door 3 years ago..." She paused. "This old house didn't feel empty anymore." I didn't know what to say, so I simply hugged her. It was the first hug we had ever shared. Neither of us realized it would also become one of the last. A month later, Mrs. Whitmore's health suddenly began to decline. She became weaker with each passing day. Even getting out of bed became difficult. Every night after work, I sat beside her bed, read her favorite novels, and made sure she took her medicine. One evening, she looked at me with an unusual calmness, almost as if she already knew her time was running out. Then she smiled. "Emily, I have something important to ask you." I nodded. "Anything." She glanced toward the old wooden wardrobe in the corner of her room and quietly whispered, "When the time comes, promise me you'll be the one who opens it." My heart suddenly began to race. I had no idea why she would ask such a strange favor, but I looked into her eyes and said the only words I could. "I promise." The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in almost 2 years. Something inside me told me not to leave her alone. Mrs. Whitmore looked weaker than ever. The doctor visited just after noon. He checked her pulse, spoke gently, and then quietly told me, "She doesn't have much time left. Just make sure she isn't alone." I thanked him, but the words echoed in my head long after he had gone. She wasn't going to be alone, not today. I stayed beside her bed, holding her hand. The room was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. After a long silence, she opened her eyes and smiled. "You kept your promise." I leaned closer. "I'm right here." She slowly reached beneath her pillow. Her trembling hand pulled out a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. It looked old, almost forgotten. She placed it in my palm and gently closed my fingers around it. "Emily." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The wardrobe." I nodded, trying not to cry. "I remember." She took one slow breath. "Only after I'm gone." Tears rolled down my face. "You don't have to talk anymore." But she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "There is a letter." "A letter?" She smiled. "It's not the money that matters. It's the reason." Before I could ask what she meant, she looked at me one last time. There was no fear in her eyes, only peace, only love. A few moments later, she quietly slipped away. The funeral was simple. Only a handful of neighbors came. I kept waiting for family members to arrive. No one did. Not a single son. Not a daughter. Not even a cousin. For the first time, I truly understood how lonely her life had been before I rented that room. That evening, the house felt painfully silent. Every chair reminded me of her. Every cup in the kitchen reminded me of our evening tea. I walked past her bedroom door several times. The key felt heavy in my pocket. Part of me wanted to wait. Another part remembered my promise. Finally, I took a deep breath and unlocked the old wooden wardrobe. The door creaked open. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a small jewelry box, several photo albums, and on the top shelf, a dark leather folder. Resting on it was a white envelope. My name was written across the front in elegant handwriting. "For Emily." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "My dear Emily, if you are reading this, it means I have finally said goodbye. Thank you for giving an old woman something she thought she had lost forever. A family." My vision blurred with tears. I continued reading. "You never helped me because you expected anything in return. You stayed because you cared. That is why everything inside this folder now belongs to you." I frowned. "Everything?" I opened the leather folder. Inside were legal papers, investment statements, property documents, and one page with a number so large I thought I was reading it wrong. $55,000. $55 million. I blinked, then looked again. The number hadn't changed. My knees became weak and I sat down on the floor. This couldn't be real. Why would a woman who lived such a simple life have a fortune like this? Before I could even gather my thoughts, someone knocked loudly on the front door. Then another knock, harder this time. I opened the door, and standing outside were 3 strangers dressed in expensive suits. The oldest man looked at me without smiling. "Are you Emily Carter?" "Yes." He took a slow step forward. "We're relatives of Eleanor Whitmore." My heart skipped a beat. Relatives? The same relatives who had never visited her had suddenly appeared, and the first thing one of them said was, "We're here to discuss the inheritance." For a moment I simply stood there. The 3 strangers walked into the house as if they already owned it. The oldest man introduced himself. "My name is Richard Whitmore. Eleanor was my cousin." The woman beside him quickly added, "And I'm her niece." I searched their faces, trying to remember if Mrs. Whitmore had ever mentioned them. She never had. Richard looked around the living room and sighed dramatically. "It's sad. We were just about to visit her." I almost laughed. "Really? Because I lived here for 3 years. And I never saw any of you." The room fell silent. His smile disappeared. "Well, life gets busy." Busy. That single word made my heart ache. Mrs. Whitmore had spent birthdays alone, Christmas alone, countless evenings waiting for someone who never came. Now, only after her funeral, they had suddenly found the time. Richard cleared his throat. "We understand Eleanor left some important documents." I didn't answer. He continued, "As her family, we'll take care of everything." Before I could respond, another voice came from the front door. "I'm afraid that's not how Mrs. Whitmore wanted it." We all turned around. A well-dressed woman stepped inside, carrying a briefcase. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. "My name is Laura Bennett. I'm Mrs. Whitmore's attorney." Richard's confident expression vanished. The attorney placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This contains Eleanor Whitmore's final instructions." She looked directly at me. "Emily, Eleanor asked me to be here the day anyone came asking about her estate." Richard crossed his arms. "This is unnecessary. We're her closest relatives." Laura opened the envelope without reacting. "She expected you would say that." She removed a document and began reading. "To anyone who remembers me only after I'm gone, thank you for proving I made the right choice." The room became perfectly still. Laura continued, "Family is not decided by blood. Family is decided by love, kindness, and presence." Richard interrupted angrily. "This is ridiculous." Laura calmly handed him another paper, a legally witnessed will. He read the first page. The color slowly disappeared from his face. Everything, the house, the investments, the savings, every legal asset, had been left to Emily Carter. No conditions, no shared ownership, no hidden clauses, just one name, mine. The woman beside Richard whispered, "She manipulated Eleanor." I finally spoke. "No, I made her tea. I drove her to the doctor. I listened when nobody else would. I stayed. You disappeared." Nobody answered. Laura quietly placed one final item on the table, a small flash drive. Eleanor also recorded a personal message. She connected it to the television. Mrs. Whitmore appeared on the screen, smiling gently. "If you're watching this, then I'm already gone." She looked directly into the camera. "And if my relatives are standing in my living room, let me save everyone some time." She smiled. "You never visited when I needed company. You never called to ask if I was eating. You never cared whether I was alive." She paused. "But Emily did. She never asked me for money. She asked if I'd had breakfast." Tears filled my eyes. Mrs. Whitmore smiled one last time. "So if you're upset today, don't blame Emily. Blame the years you chose not to be here." The video ended. No one spoke. Richard quietly folded the documents. Without another word, he and the others walked out of the house. For the second time that week, the house became silent. But this time, it wasn't the silence of loneliness, it was the silence of justice. That evening, I sat alone on the porch with Mrs. Whitmore's favorite cup of tea beside me. I looked toward the sunset, the same view she loved so much. For a long time, I thought about the $55 million. It could buy almost anything, but it could never buy the one thing Mrs. Whitmore had wanted most: a family. That's why I made a promise to her. A promise that would become the true meaning of her gift, and that promise would change thousands of lives, including my own. The next few weeks felt unreal. Every morning I woke up in the same small room I had rented for 3 years. The same alarm clock rang, the same coffee mug sat on my kitchen counter, but everything else had changed. The legal process took several months, and every document confirmed the same truth. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore had made her decision years before she passed away. No one had pressured her, no one had tricked her. She had simply chosen the person who stood beside her when no one else did. One afternoon, Laura, her attorney, handed me one final envelope. "Eleanor wanted you to open this only after everything was complete." I smiled through my tears. She really thought of everything. Inside was another handwritten letter. It read, "My dear Emily, if this letter has reached you, then the world has finally accepted my last wish. Please don't spend your life proving that you deserved what I gave you. You already proved it every day you stayed beside me." I wiped away my tears and kept reading. "Use this gift to build the kind of world where no elderly person has to wait by a window, hoping someone will visit." That sentence stayed with me for days. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I made a decision. I sold several investment properties that Mrs. Whitmore had left behind and created the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. Its mission was simple: no elderly person should ever feel forgotten. The foundation helped lonely seniors with home care, medical support, warm meals, and regular visits from volunteers. Then I started another program: scholarships for young women who dreamed of becoming nurses but couldn't afford school, because I knew exactly what it felt like to count every dollar. Months later, I visited the foundation's first community home. An elderly woman smiled at me as I walked through the door. "You must be Emily." I nodded. She reached out and hugged me. "Thank you for remembering people like us." At that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since Mrs. Whitmore was alive: home. That evening, I returned to the old house one last time. I walked onto the front porch with 2 cups of tea. I placed one on the empty chair where Mrs. Whitmore used to sit. The sunset painted the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. I smiled. "You were right," I whispered. "The right person really can make silence feel peaceful." A gentle breeze moved through the trees. For just a moment, it felt as though she was sitting beside me again, not saying a word, just smiling. People often ask me what it feels like to inherit $55 million. They expect me to talk about luxury, expensive cars, or beautiful vacations, but that's never the answer I give. Instead, I tell them this: I inherited something far more valuable than money. I inherited the chance to continue someone's kindness. Mrs. Whitmore didn't leave me wealthy because I was lucky. She left me wealthy because she believed kindness should never be wasted. And every time an elderly person smiles because someone finally visited, every time a young nurse graduates because she received a scholarship, I know her story didn't end the day she left this world. It simply found a new beginning. Ending reflection. Sometimes the people who share our blood know us the least, and sometimes a complete stranger becomes the family we always needed. Money can change your future, but kindness can change someone else's forever. If there's someone in your life who feels forgotten, don't wait until it's too late to remind them they matter, because the greatest inheritance anyone can leave behind is love.